Goedenavond, bonsoir, welkom iedereen, bienvenue. Nous sommes extrêmement heureux ce soir de pouvoir accueillir Billy Woodberry avec nous. We zijn enorm geëerd om vanavond Billy Woodberry te kunnen verwelkomen in CINEMATEK. We are very, very honored to welcome filmmaker Billy Woodberry tonight here at CINEMATEK for retrospective of his work. And also carte blanche, a selection of films he liked. So that's for until the end of the month. Will be with his choices and his own films. I really, really want to say thank you to Stoffel Debuysere, who will conduct the conversation after the movie. Stoffel Debuysere is also a scholar like Billy Woodberry. So Billy Woodberry, I'm sorry. First, to introduce a little bit Billy Woodberry, you can read the text in the brochure, but of course Billy Woodberry is one of the major Afro-American filmmakers and founder of what was then has been called the LA Rebellion, so a collective of filmmakers, including Gerima and Charles Burnett, and who has been very, very influential in the film history, and besides of that is a scholar like Stoffel, scholar dedicated to film history, now living in Lisbon. Stoffel and Courtisan are the partners on this program. The film you're going to see tonight was was shown last year at Rotterdam Film Festival, and Stoffel did an extensive interview with Billy Woodberry after the screening, and he immediately contacted us after that and asking if we would be interested in showing Billy's film and welcoming him here in Brussels. And we said yes, and that's more than 1 year later what's happening tonight, what's starting tonight. So thank you again for being here. It's an honor. Please.
Thank you. Thank you to the Cinematek, to Courtisan, to Christophe and Stoffel for organizing the program, and thank you for being here. I hope you enjoy the film, and I will be here to try to answer any questions or receive any comments you have about it. I hope you are able to see the program and the selection, because I think there are some wonderful, somewhat rare choices involved, and some that you may know and some that you might discover, but I hope you find them interesting as I have over time. Thanks, because without you, there's no anything. So thanks a lot. Merci beaucoup.
Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you all for staying. Thank you, Billy, for the film, and thank you for being here, and for the wonderful carte blanche that you assembled with Cinematek. Of course, we have to talk about Mário, but I think we can also try to situate Mário within your trajectory or your history of filmmaking, your interest in culture politics. Of course, there's certain resonances in between all the films that you have made. Most, if not all, your films are based on a big amount of research, from which you craft films that have an enormous attentiveness, especially focused on figures and stories that are oftentimes left on the wayside or the underside of history. Oftentimes situated in this interspace between poetics and politics. For this film in particular, I know you spend a lot of time researching. You spend a lot of time in archives, especially in Portugal and Angola, other places. I know you were very much inspired by the writings of Basil Davidson, the historian and activist, who wrote a lot about the specific decolonial struggles in the Portuguese colonies, the Lusophone colonies, of which he says that it's quite specific, since that history is quite long-standing. The liberation only happened in 74, 75, but also because a lot of that history is left obscure. And of course, your film helps to relieve a bit of that obscurity, let's say. But I wonder, within this complex history of anti-colonial and decolonial struggles, how did this figure of Mario stand out for you? How did you choose him as the protagonist of your film?
Thank you for coming, and thank you for staying. Thanks for watching the film. And thanks for the invitation to be here. Maybe it's a sentimental reason or something, but what happened was I read a text by him that was translated. It was published in Cuba, translated it to English, and I read it about 1971 or so, 72, and it was about culture and national liberation. And what struck me, it happened that at the time I was studying like history of Brazil and Brazilian culture, and I was in love with everything Brazilian, you know, especially the cinema nova and the literature and this thing. And he makes a point in the article that of how important Brazil was for thinking about and creating modernity in the Portuguese-speaking African culture context. So that sort of resonated with me and stayed with me. And only recently did I really learn the full extent of his engagement, involvement, and intentions toward Brazil. And recent scholarship turns it up. But he was in correspondence with figures like Jorge Amado, and he was in correspondence with others in the intellectual and literary world in Brazil. And he was saying, after the 64, he certainly couldn't visit, but he thought, I don't care. Just pay me in books, okay? I would like to publish, and just pay me in books, send me books, this kind of thing. But at the time, I didn't know that. But when I came back to Portugal first time after a long time, 2013, 2014, I came back to finish a film I was making. And when I die, I won't stay dead. And I completed it in Portugal with a Portuguese production house. And I started to think, because it was a good experience, and I made that film, and I made a small film, 10-minute film, Marseille après la guerre. And I enjoyed the people, and I enjoyed the thing. And I thought, if I were in this country, what could I do that would be interesting and useful? And I remembered him. And then I started to, by this time, you can find a lot of things on the internet, so I could start initially with that. And I started to find and learn more about him, learn more about what eventually happened, because I was not clear on what happened with him. What his relationship was finally to Angola after the liberation. I knew he was in Guinea-Bissau, but I had to learn all the details of that. But I chose him because the more I looked into it and investigated it, I found him a reliable interlocutor. You know, he's a reliable narrator, because he was never so self-absorbed that he can only see his point of view. And he was always generous toward others and trying to give a more full picture of that. And I learned that he had done at least 3 major interviews. One book-length interview was published in Lisbon after he died in 1990. Another one he made with a French sociologist, Christine Messiaen, and another one that he made with that you see in the film. It was made in 1985-86 with a Portuguese journalist and activist, Diana Dringa, who appears in the film talking mostly about his brother. She was an anti-fascist activist and stuff, and she interviewed him for 3 hours. And I always wanted to have his voice. It seemed like something that could be helpful. And so eventually we were able to see the entire interview, because before we could only see short clips online, primarily what she used in her television documentary about the generation of 60. And then it was a matter of figuring out and going through various stages of trying to present the project in a coherent way, of convincing way to find the support for that and that and that. But he was always the figure that, because he was connected to all of the other liberation movements, that they founded an organization together that remained until the liberation. And he had been president of that organization, and so he knew all of them. They all knew each other, because it starts with like 7 people, huh? And they all met in Lisbon and the Casa Imperial, the House of Student of the Empire. And they started their project there. And I just found him a figure that connected to so many people and so many things in terms of his involvement in the first Congress of Black Writers in Paris in '56, when he was young and enthusiastic, and he did all the work of correspondence and receiving the text in this thing. And that's something we know about generally because of the story of these Black intellectuals and artists in this thing. And I found this connection to that and other things. So that's partly how I came to. I was not in doubt, thinking I would make it about somebody else. I knew I would make it about him, but I didn't know exactly how.
It's also quite essential, I think, that he maintained that culture was an important part for the liberation struggle, for the emancipation struggle. Because I think this is an important guiding thread throughout your work. And I think it's connected also to your educational years, let's say, where you were always, like you mentioned or suggested, between political activism and at some point filmmaking. So perhaps you can say a bit about that, about the origin of your interest in that specific interspace between poetics and politics.
It so happens that I was thinking about, maybe when I was younger, I was thinking first, and I kind of, my orientation was I thought I was a person of some political, I was a student of politics and political economy and this kind of thing. But then the thing of filmmaking, I was exposed because I exposed myself. I went to a course, and it happened, it was a summer course in between graduate and undergraduate school. And I saw documentaries from Cuba, because this is from the mid-'60s, late '60s, early '70s, about things like literacy campaign. And the fact that they managed to make that interesting, that it was interesting and exciting, and it was a way to be involved socially and politically, and that you could do that with a film. Then I thought, oh yeah, well, I'm interested in a little bit in photography and film and that thing, and you can actually do this and justify yourself to your political people, you know. Maybe it was that. And so I sort of evolved from that. But the other thing is, in my trying to understand politics and this kind of thing and social change and that, I tended to maybe be interested already in the cultural dimension of that. But I had to, I had to study it, I had to learn, I had to develop that. And also I had the thought that cinema or film is it's an instrument of culture. It's a way of sharing and conveying things about, and expressing things culturally and politically at the same time. And so that became my way, you know. And I had to learn, and I tried different ways of doing that and this kind of thing. And I had examples, from the African cinema, from Latin American cinema, from Asian cinema, because these were the ones I was obsessed with, right? And were the ones I was learning with. And then because I was seeing those things and thinking about them, I looked at my own society. I tried to look at it in a similar way, to be inside and outside at the same time, and then to try to acquire examples, writers, thinkers, but a lot writers and poets and this kind of thing, who try to address the society in their work without losing the fact that it was poetry, not just to. So that was maybe something I started really early. Then in this instance, not to be mystical about it, but what happens is I found that because he was a figure devoted to culture and starts with poetry, like all of them, and he cultivates this. It's a part of his deep interest in this kind of thing. I thought, okay, that's interesting. That's important. But then I realized that the cultural dimension, in a way, is something that lasts. It lasts longer than the inter-party debates about a particular moment or strategy and tactics and that thing. Most people don't remember. Sometimes they don't even remember very important battles or campaigns or things like that, unless it's realized and conveyed in song or poem or dance or something like that. But this cultural dimension seems to be broad enough and rich enough, inclusive enough, if it's successful, to stay with people and also to be viable, because you can revisit it, you can revive it, you can critique it, you can see the limitations, and you can make something meaningful in the present while talking about something from the past. And yeah, you can be critical of it. But in culture, it's another way of knowing, another way in art. It's another way of knowing and learning about the world, right? And being even engaged in the world. When you film, when you go and you ask people to talk to you, and how you do it, what they say, how they sound, all those things. It's a way of learning something more than what they say, because I didn't know a lot of these people who appear in the film until I met them to interview them. I might have known a bit about them because I did some research and background, but how they would present, what they would say, how it would connect, I was not always sure. I hope that answers some of it.
I can imagine that was the reason why the figure of Mario resonated so much with you. He was even Minister of Culture in Guinea-Bissau, but this confidence, this faith in culture and art can mean something.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he had thought about it a lot, and he had studied, and he insisted on it, you know. I'm thinking that even now, with the sort of rediscovery or presenting of the films of Sarah Maldor, which only enhances maybe the films and her and that thing. It was not so easy in the midst of conducting an anti-colonial liberation war to convince people who don't have vast means that one way we can make our struggle and our efforts known and give people a sense of who we are is we can make a film. You should make a film, and they're thinking, no, we should have a truck. I mean, I'm talking about the internal dynamic of trying to convince others of the value of doing that. But they insisted, they found means, okay, to make the film. She won the competition to make Sambizanga, to make the other films. So she made them. But it was not so easy internally, I'm sure, because they're in a liberation movement, they have varying contending needs and a task to do. Eventually, they came to appreciate and realize. But I'm sure it's not so easy to in the midst of that, convince people, yeah, we should make a film. That's one way a lot of people will learn. And it's true, a lot of us did learn about the place, the subject, what was happening by watching a movie. Her movie and movies that were made by others, sometimes from outside, from Europe, from Scandinavia, from France, from committed people who made movies about liberation movements. It's partly how I learned about them. And initially, then you can access other means, but it's something I value that I learned.
One of the amazing things in the film are the entanglements. I mean, the story of Mário is entangled with the story of Fanon, of Césaire, but there's also Sarah Maldoror, as you mentioned. There's Chris Marker as well. So I can imagine that all these figures are figures that you carried with you throughout your own personal history, but that somehow came together in this film and in this story.
Sure, it actually it's me and a whole generation of people, especially colleagues that I'm close to. We knew about these figures, and so when you learn of the relationships that Mário had with all these figures that we like or we appreciate for whatever reason, in another context, to discover that he's close with Chris Marker, and that he can ask Chris Marker to come to Guinea to be with the young filmmakers that had trained in Cuba and who had documented the Liberation War, and to assess their level of preparedness in this thing. And Chris Marker will do it. He was between Guinea-Bissau and Japan because he was making Sans Soleil. He tells you in the movie, huh? But he was sleeping in a former barracks in Guinea-Bissau and being with them and teaching them. He comes back, he brings old copies of Potemkin and different things, and he teaches them editing, okay? But also he says that, in fact, they are capable of working anywhere in the world. They are quite competent. But Mário could ask him that. And I have to say, and I don't mean to embarrass anyone, but even in research, like, people can be quite careless. And for me, it's quite careless because Mário is not as well known in the wider, in Europe or United States or in the world as he might be, huh? But I remember there's an interview, you can find it published, and it's Colin McCabe speaking with Chris Marker. And he says, "Why would you go to Guinea-Bissau?" And Chris Marker says, because he says, now, okay, but it's kind of a narco-traffic hub, whatever. That's all people know about it, but that was not the case before. And I went there because my friend Mário asked me to. They put my friend Maria asked me to. So he's lost again. And this is a reputable presentation. And I worry because so many young ones, and I remember at school teaching, and they were so in love with Chris Marker, and they were all gonna, And it's not good to mislead them. They should know he had a friend that was an African guy who can ask him to come across the world, and he comes. Or he's close with Sarah forever. And Sarah says, for Chris Marker, I get my gloves and I go anywhere. They should know that. People should know about these relationships, huh?
in that sense, there's also connection with the film you made before this, the film about Bob Kaufman. Both figures, Mario and Bob Kaufman, I mean, they were entangled with politics and poetics, but somehow they're also in the shadows. They remained in the shadows of history. I think Charlie Parker at some point called it the jazz corner of life.
He said it about him.
Yeah.
He said it about Charlie Parker. Bob Kaufman did.
What is it that interests you so much in these shadow figures? Do you feel as a kind of responsibility to give them a new life, as it were?
No, I think I don't have that intention. I have the intention. I realize, and for me, they're like really important, and they're probably important for others if they learn about them. And they have all kind of wonderful things about them. They did extraordinary things. You know, they were in the world, right? And people should. I feel like people would want to know that, and they should know that, right? And so it's not really okay. When I made the Kaufman movie, I could get a little energy from the fact that most of the celebration and the record, you know, the revisiting and the celebrating the beat era and the whole thing ignored him. I could get some energy and being a bit upset about that, right? But then I had to, and in Mario's case also, I assumed the position. I said, no, I need to follow Bob about this. Okay, I know people were less than generous or less than attentive sometimes to him or whatever. But how did he respond to that? And if I find that he didn't, that in fact he liked Ginsberg, he thought he was the king of poetry, and then Ginsberg comes to town, he wants to be with him, right, this thing. So, okay, I allow that. I allow the others, if they think that Ginsberg and the others weren't so generous to him, others can say that. But I don't, that was not my position. I'm gonna go with Bob. I'm gonna find out how he felt, why he liked his people, right? I tried to understand with Mario. I noticed that Mario, in his disagreements with people, he didn't go, he didn't do gossip, and he didn't do personal attacks and things like that. And I tried to see if, in fact, asides, he did that. No, it appears that he kept things on a certain plane. I disagree with that person because of my analysis is different than him. I have a different intellectual understanding of that. So I tried to, okay, I don't want to add anything to that. Even some people denounce some figures that Mario had known and associated with, and Mario can agree that that person is a bit dogmatic. But in fact, I didn't allow her to say that because, I mean, I cut it out because it was not his tone, and it didn't advance us very much knowing that that guy was that. So it's like that. So I think, yeah, I can have a bit of anger, vengeance, whatever. That can motivate me, right? When you ignore them, but I don't want that to be the thing. And also, it's an interesting thing because the people who should know, for instance, who know a lot about the beats and they kind of follow it and they kind of dream that they're that and all this thing. And they don't know about Bob Kaufman. Okay, two things happen. They realize they should know about Bob Kaufman. They don't know about Bob Kaufman. And God damn it, they don't like you reminding them that they don't know. So they don't know how they feel. They're a bit ambivalent about the whole thing because they don't like to be reminded because they're educated, learned, and sensitive people. Same thing can happen. It didn't happen. Maybe it happens with Mario. I don't know. But in this other short movie I made, Story from Africa, people they like my work. They talk about. They write about. I send them that thing. The names are difficult. It's things they don't know. They hadn't thought about the pacification campaign, and they hadn't thought about Portugal, and none of that. And they said, I'm sorry, I can't say anything about this. Okay, so then they're pissed off because I brought them something I wanted to share, right? And it's a movie. I mean, and you have a internet, you can look it up, you know. But I know this is a tendency. It's not making me seem smart or anything. It's just really they don't like it. So that's part of the story with it. But then you find a young woman writes to me a week ago and said, I just made a new translation of Bob Kaufman's poetry in French. Can I send it to you? I said, sure. And I said, but there were translations before. She said, yeah, but from 1970 or something like that. And now a new publisher, and she's translated 3 of his books. And I said, did you see the movie I made? That's why I started it. But she lives in another, not in Paris, in Lyon or someplace. So good.
Do you feel the same is happening with Mario? I mean, the film has been showing in Lisbon, and you mentioned that the film was shown in Luanda just last week or a few weeks ago.
3-4 weeks ago.
Does that, you think, generate a new kind of consciousness, or at least acknowledgement?
I think maybe it gave some people an occasion to learn a bit more about him, because it's a name, it's a family, it's known by some people, but of another era. So for the others to even have the possibility to consider what he says and how he explains those years and how they formed and what they did and this kind of thing, is fairly recent to them. It's fairly new, and also film is, as you know, it's a lot of us can watch it together. It's portable, you know, and they watch it together. They learn things. They have discussions with others, and also they have an investment because they have a version of the story, and so they seemed appreciative, and sometimes moved because it's their talking. Speaks their language. It's their guy, you know. So they're happy to discover sometimes. And also, people in Portugal, they're interested. They are generous. They are curious. They're more curious, huh?
Well, talking about Portugal, it's been now 15 years, only 50 years since the liberation. And I was wondering, is there more and more knowledge and again acknowledgement of the importance of these liberation struggles, also for the history of their own revolution?
Yes. Recently, I saw a film recently called We Are People of the Islands, made 2025, by a young filmmaker, Laura Sosa. She's Mozambican. And the film is about 31 young people from Cape Verde that went to Cuba for military training because they thought they could launch armed actions in Cape Verde. Turns out they couldn't do that. It was not viable, so they withdrew from that plan and they went to Guinea-Bissau, and they were part of the same political party. But Laura is maybe less than 40. and she made this movie. But she lives in Mozambique. Her father is a filmmaker, one of the founding filmmakers of New Mozambique, and her mother, Isabel Norinho, is also. But she made this film, and she used a lot of archival material, and she made interviews with all this, as many of the people as she possibly could, who were a part of that experience. And that's another opportunity for that to circulate and for the people to know. And in the film, one of the commanders reminds the audience that many of the captains who caused the revolt and led the revolt in the Portuguese armed forces that overthrew the dictatorship, they were in Guinea, and they were transformed in their time in Guinea and also in their thinking, because they had a circle for thinking and discussing and planning and that kind of thing while they were in Guinea. And in other places too. But it was the captain's revolution, finally. The old general guy, Spinola, he tried to jump in front, but it didn't last because he had to go out. And Diana Dringa's whole thesis is that, in fact, if we only celebrate the heroic armed forces, we miss the point and we miss the significance of the liberation movements in the contribution to the coming of democracy in Portugal. The anti-fascist movement in Portugal played some role in the development of liberation movements in Africa. He talks about, as a student, they were involved in the movement, the United Democratic Movement of Students, which was a Communist Party led movement, that kind of thing. Yeah, so, and I have to say, yeah, I believe that it's a point of consideration. If before nobody talked about it, it's not true of people today. There's a recognition that the two things were connected. Portugal, they call it the colonial war, and in Africa, they call it the wars of national liberation. And in Laura's film, one of the commanders who fighters, he says so explicitly. He reminds them. And the thing is, I remember a funny joke. You know, Otello, the Carvalho, the leader, the more revolutionary one, he went with a delegation of Portuguese after the independence to Mozambique. And the guys in Mozambique said, Otello, come to your home. Why are you with these people? Come, let's transform your country. He was born in Mozambique. He said, oh, I have to. Yeah, so some of them had these kind of ties. And people are aware of it.
I was struck by a certain tension or a certain contradiction in the film. I mean, in the last scene, we see him say that he has no regrets and that he hopes that the next generations take up the struggle. But a few scenes before that, there's this interview with Sophie Bessis, where she mentions that he was really struggling by this question of how hope turned into failure somehow. Do you have the feeling that he was living with this contradiction somehow towards the end of his life?
Oh, yes, I think so. And I think because it's a kind of testament, and this man who talks about meeting him at 16 and he became like, in Guinea-Bissau, and that guy became a big figure in the international politics in the UN and all that. He said that one thing Mario always said to him, and one way he always approached things with him is, I want you to believe. If I have doubts, if I'm, you know, I need you to believe. I don't want my cynicism, my baggage to pass on to you. You need to believe for this to work. He also told him, because Carlos was not so sure how he felt about the coup, this kind of thing, he says, Carlos, power gain like that never lasts. It won't last, and it won't deliver what it wants to deliver, okay? So I think both things were true, that in fact his way was he would draw from politics and he go to intellectual work, and it's a project of culture in a way, because it's writing a history of nationalism in the Portuguese African world. That was his project when he died. But what he tells Sophie, I think I know he told her that. I think he believed, he had that question. I think he had it till the end. But I think he didn't want to give to the people, young people, and people after him. He didn't want to give that to them. He want them to. His position is we realize part of the project, but only part of it. Now it's up to you to carry it to the next level. So he bequeathed them a challenge. Fanon says that thing. Each generation faces its own challenge, and you either accomplish or you betray it. But it's different than the one I faced. Yeah. So I think he knew he was saying that for people. Talking to Sophie is more private, and she's a mature person and can analyze and think for herself. And yeah, he was a bit saddened by that.
It strikes me that that despite of or because of this belief, this confidence, this drive that he had his whole life, he ended up in exile as a dissident. He ended up in some level of precariousness, and this also perhaps connects him to the figure of Bob Kaufman. I always have to think, when I think about your work, about this song in the film you made about Bob Kaufman by Billie Holiday, Solitude, which is about solitude in the face of, you know, the hauntings of and tauntings of history and memory. And I think that there's something in all your films, this kind of tension or dynamics between solitude and still a kind of search for community, a sense of community or a sense of communality. Does that resonate with you? Is that something that is somehow at the heart of your thinking and your working?
Probably. But I think, it's not unique. There's this, I think it's from Henri Barbusse or Romain Rolland or one of those French guys who first said, pessimist of intelligence, optimist of will, which Gramsci is the figure we attribute it to. So in a way, I mean, it's like you carry on, you have to. And so maybe, I don't know that I'm that brave, but maybe I suggest to people, and also history is tragic. And even heroic people, for me, sometimes they're tragic. They're tragic because they have the full capacity, ability, desire, and drive to accomplish something, but circumstances, situations, and things overwhelm their capacity. So it's tragic. If they didn't attempt anything or they were never about anything, we wouldn't notice. Then it's something else, farcical maybe. But yeah, I think, and Bob Kaufman, the difference is Bob Kaufman had he had 2 or 3 lives. Huh? When he did a lot of those things when he was very young. And then he has a second life when he decides to be a poet and do poetry and do this kind of thing. He had been a militant, and a labor organizer and all this kind of thing, but he was always a bit anarchistic. And he had this other side. He liked poetry and he liked music and he liked those things. But when he was doing his militant work and that kind of thing, it wasn't exactly the same. And then he figured out you can express yourself politically, and you can express politics in another form through poetry and making actions and publishing a magazine and including other people, and also insisting on the right of people to gather and to share poetry and music and this thing, and to resist the police in doing that, to resist the police who are doing it out of prejudice and bias and this kind of thing. He would stand up for that. So he carried that, and he paid the price for it. And I think Mario had a longer life politically, and a longer life of activity, and a longer life of publishing and lasting things, both of them. But I don't know. I think the Kaufman thing gave me the confidence, if not illusion, that I could make Mario.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's because trying to convince people, it seems very abstract. Like, why? But then I thought, oh yeah, we could do that. I didn't know we would do it in this particular form, but we could do it.
As mentioned, Christophe mentioned in the introduction, you were a part of a generation of filmmakers at UCLA, which would at some point be named LA Rebellion. And there's this writer filmmaker, Tony Bambara, and he says something about this generation of filmmakers that he said that most of the work was about the recovery of, quote, our own suppressed bodies of literature, lore, and history. And it seems to me that this particular mission, let's say, is something that you took at heart. It was already there in your first film, Bless Their Little Hearts, in a way. And now, many decades later, it's still very much your main mission, I think, in filmmaking.
I guess it turns out that way. Tony Cade is a woman. As a matter of fact, a friend is he's finishing a movie about her. Now you have to show it because you thought it was a man. But anyway, yeah. But I mean, I think that's a kind of common project, and it was there to do, because so much was ignored and neglected and not known and not thought of and that kind of thing. So, hey, we can do that. We don't have to imitate and do what everybody else is trying to do. And so at least we could start. And we indicate to the next generation that there are untapped, valuable things to do. You don't have to just reproduce the same nonsense, you know. And you could find more inspiring examples from the past, maybe. I always suggest they don't look far enough back, you know. They look to last year. You should look 100 years. But anyway.
You mentioned that some of your colleagues have been very important for you, and I imagine that these colleagues were the ones at CalArts. And I noticed that in your carte blanche, there's at least 2 films of your colleagues. There's one by Bitomsky, there's one by Alan Sekula.
Yeah.
Can you say how these colleagues, how these filmmakers, how these artists were important in your trajectory?
Oh, they were important. Also, a person like Tom Anderson, people like that, who I knew slightly. After making the first long film and sort of having it shown around and this kind of thing, and it was suggested that I should teach, huh? And then I tried to resist that, even though I suspected I would like it, that kind of thing. And in 1988, I was invited to CalArts as a visiting artist and to do a graduate course, something about race and representation, by a great dean of the art school, Catherine Lord. She wanted to create a course. And so I went there, and then the people in the film school invited me to do a course. And I knew Tom, and I knew Alan, and I got to know Alan really well. And then I got to know Hartmut Bitomsky, because he was a German filmmaker, but he came to be the dean and to teach at the film school, and he transformed the film school. And it became a school. It became really strong in documentary film, partly because he knew so much about it and he encouraged an example. And I found myself more and more, because I was teaching in the art school and the photography program, I found myself more and more admiring the example of the photography students and the photographers, the way they worked, because they didn't need 120 pages to work. They didn't need a truck and a crew and a cast and all this kind of thing. And then these small portable video cameras were becoming popular and used. So I thought I had a project fall through in my next film, long film. And then I thought, I don't want to do that. After I got over I realized I was depressed by it, so I thought, I don't want to do that anymore. And I want to learn with these people, because they have an idea, they have a plan, they have a project, they figure it's something to engage them, and they need to prepare, and they need to research and that. And then they go to work, and they make a series, they make a body of work about a given subject. And sometimes they write, okay, so if you're going to make images, now you can make them, because it's high 8, it's digital, it's. And so I started over. And I started over really with Alan Sekula, because he received a commission to make a documentary work about the
Frank Gehry. No?
Frank Gehry Disney Concert Hall and the construction of that. And he invited me to make the video about it. So for 3.5, 4 years, I was going there every Tuesday or every time I could, and I was making something. So that was how I got back to it. But it was the realize it was having to teach history of documentary film, which nobody wanted to teach, but I liked it. I enjoyed it. The Americans, the British, the Russians, all of that. And it became, I decided that I liked it, that it was interesting, important, and I needed to teach myself how to do it. And those were the people that inspired me, and also that supported me, that helped me do that. I don't make films like them necessarily, but they appreciate them. Hartmut, I remember after, and when I die, I want to say that he said, I never liked poetry in films, but I believe you convinced me. Which is high praise, huh? By him, really. He's a serious man. So I think that's the reason they're important for me. And the work is really good. I mean, when you see Forgotten Space, you should think, if you don't want to go back too far, like the spill in Vigo, when the oil spilled. You can go to a few years ago when that tanker that was leaking all kind of vile things and exploded in Beirut and took down half the old city in that thing. you see The Forgotten Space, you think of my friend, Alan Sekula, because all of his work is about knowing the political economy, geography, and all that's involved with the sea. And one thing we know is false flags. You can't tell who really owned that bomb that was sitting in the Bay of Lebanon, because it was Georgian flagged by who knows what, and poof. And he was on top of all that. There's another young woman, actually, from that part of the world who's taken up, and she has some books on Verso and this. She writes a lot about the sea, but that was his thing, was the sea, all aspects, especially the sailors, the seamen, the laws governing the sea, and also the dockers, and all things related to the sea. And Hartmut Bitomsky, he made a movie, VW Complex, which is the story of Volkswagen and its history, like the fact that Polish slave laborers built the first people's car, right, that they were showing off with Hitler and stuff like that. And he goes deep on that, all of those things, but also, so he was in Chicago showing that film. I recommend it if you can find it, VW Complex. And a guy came to him and said, I have an idea. I know what your next film should be. And he says, so what is B-52, this bomber. And it's an incredible film. You will see, yes, you can be interested in the B-52 because the B-52 paid the schooling, the breakfast, the life of the United States, right? And now Boeing, you know, the aircraft company that built this plane, 747. First they built a long-range bomber. Then they figured out they could build a long-range passenger plane that we travel on across the thing, right? But they needed that bomber to fly at high altitudes for long distance without needing to refuel, right? And it's a monstrous machine. But we see that. And they tell you themselves, because he is not a sort of play radical gadfly. So he goes to them, and the generals, the Air Force people who are in charge of the planes, who are maintaining it and that, the colonel has to come and tell him, he's filming, stop telling him that. Because the guy tells you how much one of them cost. And you're not supposed to know that, right? Wonderful films, but see for yourself and write me a note.
You guys have any questions or comments, feedback? Please go ahead. Yeah. Towards the back. Wait, maybe I'll try.
Thank you. Okay. Hello. Yes. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I didn't know that you existed before this afternoon. And I didn't know that Mario Pinto de Andrade existed either before this evening. And so I checked when I came your name on Wikipedia, and there I found that apart from English, the only other language that would refer to you was, or is, a southeastern Nigerian dialect called Igbo. There's nothing in French, nothing in Dutch, nothing in German, and so on. And there's absolutely no mention of your film Mario on the Wikipedia English article. So there's something there to be filled in at some stage by someone. I found your film very sober and very interesting and informative, and in reminding me indirectly of another film that we saw here in Belgium a few months ago, which is called Soundtrack to a Coup d'etat.
Yes.
A quite different one, but again, talking about colonialism and so on. It was made, of course, by a Flemish director, and it was made known quite broadly in Belgium. I don't think your film will probably have the same chance, but maybe I'm wrong, and I hope I'll be wrong. So my question would be, if you don't mind answering this question, you were part of a collective, the LA Rebellion, from what I understand. That was almost 60 years ago. To what extent young people in the last 20, 25 years have actually taken off from where you and your colleagues and the following generation stopped, or more or less continue to work? That's what I would like to know. If there's any continuity, in other words. Thank you.
I think because in recent years, in 2011, I think, there was a big program to restore, to document, to present publicly the films of people of this group that was called the LA Rebellion. We didn't call ourselves that. That came from a literary and film scholar who gave a paper and he called it that, which is okay. I mean, that happened. There was no Nouvelle Vague either, except the publicist said. And Cinema Nova, same thing. But what happens is, okay, so from 2011 to the present, these films and this program and this notion, this idea has been circulating. The Wikipedia is probably from 2011 because it was a student at NYU or someplace. It was her class project to make Wikipedia for all of them that she could. So she did it. And nobody, I don't know if, I never seen it, I don't know if they ever revised it. But that's how we got to Wikipedia. Now, what happens is some younger people, because the people immediately after us, and maybe in large part, say in the 90s, they weren't exactly onto the same thing. And they did interesting work at that particular school. I know I was around. And they didn't cohere as a group, and they didn't articulate a direction or anything like that. But some of them, they had some success working as professionals, that kind of thing. And maybe I was on a jury at the La Feste, had the student film jury at the La Feste Film Festival in Lisbon last November. And I was one of 3 people judging the films from La Femis, UCLA, the National Film School in Portugal, and the film school in Cuba, as I remember. And it's interesting because 2 young people from UCLA, they chose. One is African, his family's from Sierra Leone. The other is a young black woman from Los Angeles. And the film ended up winning, not because I went to whatever, but the 3 of us agreed. She won a prize, and the young woman from Portuguese school won a prize. The relevance is that she came to me, and she knew who I was, and she started talking to me, right? And that for her, it's a reference. But it's probably a reference because 11 years ago they published a big catalog and it's been circulating and that thing. And they can consider. Before they used to see the films, and there were some people who took some inspiration. Not all African Americans are black ones, but a lot of different ones. They took inspiration, like I took it from Brazilians and Cubans and all that stuff. And they made of it what they could, and they sometimes tell me, or somebody tells me, or they mention something in that thing, but you're never sure. But then some people directly, like my friend Haile Garima, my colleague, he taught for over 35 years at Howard University. And many of the leading cinematographers, it happens, right, of the current generation, Bradford Young, and this artist, Arthur Jaffa, and a number of them, they went to school there. And they still come back and work with him and this kind of thing. So they have their own approach in that thing, but at least they are aware of it. And they're trying to figure out the best way. For instance, Bradford and his crew were filming a commercial about hotels in Portugal and all that. And they made a date, and then they came and had lunch with me. And they felt they need to do that just to be in touch and stay grounded or whatever with the old guy, kind of thing. And I liked them. And what I like is, like, they decided we work when we need to work. And we save and we move to Baltimore, Maryland. And we build our place and we raise our families. But we work when my bank account says you need to work. But they don't take every job. They're not hustling. So it's a different sensibility. So I think they figured out a way in their time, even given their greater professional opportunities, and they're talented people and capable, they tried to figure out the best way for them to proceed. And some young people, they claim they're inspired. And they're inspired by different ones. I'm one guy. There's about 10, 12 of these people. And they all have their influence. They all have their contact. And I don't know that in some, it's a legacy of the LA rebellion or whatever. But young people in Los Angeles in the arts and in culture, they're aware of it. And they don't hate us. So, I think that's the case. Some really successful ones, like that Ava DuVernay, makes a point of making connections and with some of us, and she does screenings, and she talks about, and she, sometimes if she has a series, she hires some of the women and others to work on the series. So we have a kind of familiarity, a kind of care. But big influence, I don't know. I don't think so. It's not the point. I mean, it's not what happened. No, it's not that it's not the point. And probably it's best that they don't follow us.
More comments or questions or feedback? If not, I want to thank Billy for being here. I want to thank you for being here. And please check out the program with all the films of Billy, as well as the carte blanche of about 10, 12 films that Billy selected by hand. So please give him a last
Thank
applause.
you. No, thank you. We applaud you. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. You have many, as they say in my home country, you have many entertainment options. The fact that you sacrificed and decided to spend it here